Hey aspirant, welcome to Insights I Can Initiative. The first topic for today would be a movie that is nominated to Oscars, a short movie called Anuja. So, very recently, I think on 23rd of January, we celebrated the National Daughters Day. So, this movie is a kind of related to the theme of how important educating a daughter is. So this movie has multiple landmarks that needs to be looked into, and how it is useful for our exam. We'll just have a look. So if you see, this movie is based on the life of a small girl, Anuja, who is juggling between her multiple identities. So as a daughter who is 9 year old, she's also having the responsibility of taking some small household chores into work. At the same time, she has to earn some money for the family, in the form of child labor, we can say. So child labor, family responsibilities, another issue that she faces in the young age, just because she's a girl. And then she is very passionate about pursuing education. So how the child juggles between the three different responsibilities that she is having to do at a very young age. So this topic, is this movie is produced and supported by Guneet Monga. So, if you know, you have heard of her name. She is the same person who was behind the making of Elephant Whisperers, the documentary that won Oscars, I think, 2 years ago. So, women turning into producers and supporting environmentally and socially important cause is a very positive point we can mention here. If you see, especially in GS paper 4, women and leadership, women leadership comes with a lot of compassion, it is told. So you can exemplify that particular fact by telling that producers like Guneet Monga, in fact Priyanka Chopra also has supported this particular movie. So this kind of compassionate leadership brings that many hidden yet known facets of Indian society, like gender inequality and the others. So try to watch this movie if it is available, because it's a very good watch for your mains especially. And how to use it in your answers, let's quickly check that. So when it comes to GS paper 1, under the topic of women empowerment, this movie would be relevant. So it explores the various struggles and resilience of the female characters here, and it's also reflecting various challenges faced by women in Indian society. So it is directly linked to topics of, as I mentioned, gender inequality. It also talks about patriarchy. Then, how important it is to be financially independent for a woman, in order to pursue her dreams. Financial independence is relevant. At the same time, to have financial independence, a basic level of education would be important. At the same time, we can also highlight, as a second point, the role of family here. That is, families which are not so serious about the education of a girl child, but who want the children to study, but are bogged down by many financial responsibilities and larger families. This idea identify how important a family support is needed. And in GS paper 1, Indian society, salient features of Indian society, family system is one among them, which has a lot of relevance. So try to quote the role the family has played in the life of Anuja in order to uh, create the realities that she is currently facing. Right. So when it comes to the second topic that we can discuss, I mean, after all this, we can see that even in GS paper 2, where it is relevant, especially in governance. So, if you get a question, what is the need of schemes like Beti Bachao and Beti Padhao? You can tell that girls like Anuja are the ones who will get benefited from these schemes, especially the initiatives that support the education and healthcare for marginalized group. So at the same time, we can talk about the legal rights the children have and the fundamental rights that they get to education, but many a times they won't be able to realize it due to uh, multiple challenges that they are facing. And in GS paper 4, this is very relevant, as a kind of ethical dilemma for the protagonist or the kid called Anuja here, whose journey can inspire various discussions like moral courage, ethical decision making, upholding personal values in the face of adversity, and all of them. And this movie invokes a lot of empathy and compassion amidst the audience. So when we merely talk about writing, creating awareness about girls education is required, creating a consciousness among the public about the girls trauma and the problems in the younger ages important. So if we merely say about creating awareness, how will we create is a bigger question. So we can use the idea of movies and documentaries that are based on this theme. By airing it in public platforms, we can draw the attention of the public towards the challenges that the girls face, and this will definitely invoke empathy and compassion among the people. So if you see, very recently a very popular movie called Lapata Ladies, which is about the parda system followed in many parts of the country even today, was screened in Supreme Court. The purpose is just to make sure that the concept gets the center stage of discussion, and the perils of women who undergo this practices, that will be discussed, and the women will be able to question them, and the society stands with them when this questioning is done. So these movies would make your answers very interesting and not go into a rote form of just creating awareness, improve funding, and kind of create schemes that will empower women. That would be very traditional way of writing. So utilize good movies and documentaries in your answers to make them very powerful. So the next topic is again related to gender, but here the version is on the other side. That is, you would have heard the two newses of two men in India committing suicide on the grounds of domestic violence, because law didn't stand with them when they wanted to prove a point that it is they who are being exploited and not the women in the marriage. So domestic violence as a concept is well discussed and protected in Indian laws. Especially, it gives a lot of legal sanction and legal protection to women who are victims of domestic violence, with the perception that as Indian society is ridden with patriarchy and such kind of norms, women are always the victims of domestic violence. That is, if there is a victim of domestic violence, it should be women. But situations have changed quite now, where women many a times misuse these provisions of law and try to exploit the men in the marriage, especially when it comes to legal cases and financial compensations. So the two cases, when one of the techies in Bangalore and a restaurant owner in Delhi, they have committed suicide recently, with the allegation that though they were victims of domestic violence, law stood with women without properly analyzing the case that it is. So why husbands need legal protection too is a case here. So if you recall, the death of these two people created a movement in India called Men Too movement against the concept of Me Too and the sexual allegations movement of women. In the same way, Men Too movement was also gaining popularity in the social medias and other channels. So, what does the law tell now? Law, a tool for extortion. So, if you see, law has always been a tool for women empowerment. So, a woman who is a victim of domestic violence, a woman who is a victim of dowry cases, gets the protection of law, and all the government and the law is with a woman. But the same law of empowerment is turning to be a tool of extortion now. How is it? So, certain provisions of law were mentioned here. Section 24 and 25 of Hindu Marriage Act 1955 mentions that husbands can claim maintenance and alimony from wives, and it can be invoked only during the divorce proceedings. Remember this, a husband can claim alimony from the wife, but only in case of divorces. So the other provision is also available. Let it be in your mind for prelims as well. So wives can claim maintenance under section 18 of Hindu Adaptation and Maintenance Act. Right? There are two different acts here. Please see the difference. So husbands can claim alimony under this section of the act, under section 18 of Hindu Adaptation and Maintenance Act. Women, wives can claim the monetary relief, wife can claim the maintenance here. And also there is another act called Domestic Violence Act. So women can also claim compensation under Domestic Violence Act, especially monetary relief. Right, so this is how the law today stands. So in fact, only the wives are entitled to take claim monetary relief from husband for any kind of domestic violence. It's not the other way around. So why is this difference now? Why is it only different, and why only in some cases women are given the right and for male the conditions are quite tough? Because the perception is that only husbands are perpetrators of domestic violence, ignoring the possibility of cruelty by wives also, which is very much true in many cases. So there is no equivalent legal protection for husbands against domestic violence, and also to claim maintenance without seeking divorce proceedings now. So what does the law of the land tell? If you see, uh, burden of maintenance, a kind of, it's a kind of double punishment for men, it is told. So the law of the land tells that if the wife is not earning or earns less than the husband, she is entitled to maintenance or alimony even if divorce is granted by the court due to wife's cruelty. So this is something which is very difficult to analyze, because for men they have to go through a double punishment of getting divorced plus financial maintenance. So in this there is one more problematic thing that we can talk about, that is standard of living test. This could be double burden under the case. Standard of living test, that is, it's basically to decide what should be the money that is given as maintenance. So this test is usually considered flawed, because the assumption is that a woman's standard of living must be maintained in the same way it was during the marriage. So during the marriage of the two, whatever was the standard of living, the same should be maintained after they get divorced. So what is the standard of living at the time of marriage? When you take into account of this, marriage, let's say if it is short lived, where a woman has not spent enough time with the husband for any kind of relationship, then just the marriage will give her a higher standard if she happens to come from a different economic and social background. So when that test is not genuine, it becomes problematic, because wife is the one who initiates the divorce and commits the cruelty to, and the procedure of divorce tells that a man should pay alimony. So for the man, he's a victim of cruelty here, plus he has to bear the extra maintenance and money post divorce, especially to meet the living standards of the wife. So this is something that can be called out for when we talk about men to movement very strongly in our answers. So the next one is the idea of making laws gender neutral. That is, when we talk about many important laws in the country that are now towards women, it needs the angle of gender neutrality. So the time has come for the laws to rethink uh, the current laws and make them gender neutral. So it's no longer enough to assume that only women are victims in marriage. So just as laws have evolved to protect women from domestic violence, similar provisions must be extended to men also, who also can be victims of domestic violence. At the same time, there may be many abusive situations for men also to face, which needs a protection. So it must be recognized that laws were initially framed to protect women, as the country was in a transition from patriarchy to a modern society. But now, in especially in urban areas, the concept of patriarchy is not that visible. So these laws are now increasingly being misused, for which the benefit of women are not being addressed. So it is imperative that laws need to address this issue to prevent misuse of such provisions. So if the law only speaks about gender neutrality, there is an idea that the judiciary and the society also gets that even men can be victims of domestic violence. So harassment from any gender is possible is an open minded idea and a better concept to be discussed here. At the same time, when we talk about maintenance loss, okay, maintenance laws especially which talk about standard of living, they needs to be adjusted to account for situation where wife is let financially independent or even earning more than the husband. So in such cases, husband should have the right to claim maintenance if that is the case of divorce or domestic violence. Wife should be paying maintenance to this husband, which will be a law source of income for them, as seen in some instances where women have used alimony as a means of financial benefit from multiple marriages. Even that has happened. So it should be that the women should be giving maintenance to men if they will be earning more than the men. So, one of the most pressing issues that also needs to be addressed is the legal protection of men against domestic violence. That is the domestic violence act that we have. Domestic violence act mentions that women are victim. So when we spoke about alimony, we spoke about having men in an abusive relationship. Domestic violence also can be thought of that. So just as women can seek relief under this provision, um, in a similar provision should be made available for men as well. So law should recognize that both men and women are capable of cruelty and abuse, and both should have access to same level of protection. There should be no discrimination here. They should be getting same level of protection. So in cases where husband has suffered from, let's say, emotional, financial and physical abuse, he should be able to seek relief and protection under the law without facing any social stigma, especially because there are many stigmatic ideas that are there in our society that men cannot cry, men can't be hurted. So with this perception, the laws are also not protecting, so man becomes a mute victim here. Hence, if you make it a point in the act that these are possible from the side of a woman as well, slowly over a period of time the social stigma of this will go away. So when laws become gender neutral, that is in case of this, a women will be able to better maintain the husband in the case of maintenance, and men will get the due justice. So if you see, POXO Act, Prevention of Children Against Sexual Offences Act, it is gender neutral. But when we talk about POSH Act, Prevention of Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act, this is not gender neutral, but it is also witnessed that many men in employment also face sexual harassment, but the act is very focused only on preventing the sexual harassment of women. So these are all the acts that need to be made gender neutral. So especially now we talk about a balanced and just legal framework. So the current legal system was designed to protect the vulnerable. We need to think who exactly is vulnerable based on the case to case basis. So it kind of creates an unfair burden when we consider that the vulnerable section is always a woman in the marriage system. So for many men, the very system is meant to provide the relief becomes a tool for abuse. So the system which is meant for justice, it is only abusing men because they have been judged as a person who is troubling a woman. So they are in a kind of a cycle of financial and emotional distress. Correct. So it is the time for laws to recognize the flaws in this system and make them truly gender neutral. So the law should not punish the victim, whether male or a female, but should ensure that both parties in a marriage are treated fairly and justly. So if you recall GS paper 1, we have the topic women empowerment. We usually discuss the concepts of feminism, but this idea of feminism should not be overemphasized, or many a times extreme feminism is something that the law system at times follows, where justice takes a side stand and feminism takes a first stand. So when we make the laws neutral, that is when the exact feminism comes to picture. That is, feminism talks about equality between men and women. It nowhere talks about men being inferior to women, but many of our laws are reflecting this idea now. So try to use the concept, or if you get a question, critically comment on the feminist movement in the country or anything like that. These critics could be very good and makes your answer quite we can say makes your answer very good in the perspectives of discussions. So the next topic is very much relevant about the corporate structure in the country, especially from GS paper 4 perspective. So this article titled India Inc. must stand by DEI. It's both a social and a business imperative. So DEI is been the cuss word after Donald Trump has come to power now. And what should be the response of Indian companies to this kind of stand taken by many companies in US? So this article was from New Indian Express, whereas the previous was from Economic Times. So here DEI means diversity, equity and inclusion. So let us quickly hear what is the exact meaning of DEI. So in the year 2020, there was a very brutal incident in USA's one of the cities, where a person called George Floyd was brutally killed by a police personnel on the allegation of wrongful driving on the road. So this George Floyd's death created a lot of sensation in US, and people started demanding that we need equal treatment, we need diversity, equity and inclusion in our society. So if you're wondering what was so special about George Floyd, he was a black American, and as we all know, the American society is very sensitive to racist ideas, and the country's government has been working from quite long to eradicate this concept of racial discrimination. So though this idea of DEI has been part of Civil Rights Act 1960 of the USA, this concept became the mainstream demand of the people when George Floyd was literally choked to death. So what is the meaning of this diversity, equity and inclusion? The idea is that diversity, it is about, if you see what exactly diversity means, it is embracing differences, right? Equity, on the other hand, what does it mean? It relates to treating everyone fairly and offering everybody equal opportunity. That is about equity. And when it comes to inclusion, it is about an atmosphere where all feel welcome. So remember the expansion of the three terms. This is diversity, equity and inclusion. So this idea is to have people of varying backgrounds and life experiences contribute to the growth story of the whole society. But specifically, we are talking about the DEI of companies here. So various companies made it a policy, especially with the directions of the government, that they need to have a DEI policy where in their recruitment they should limit some people, or they should keep reserved some positions for people belonging from different social statuses in the US society. So it would fulfill the diversity of the workplace, equity in the workplace and also an inclusive workplace. So affirmative action, or a kind of reservation to end discrimination, it goes by the rationale that a cross section of society at every level, its most powerful and best paid included, it must reflect the overall population's diversity. So if that happens, if you go to a company, it should feel as if it is a miniature of the world or the society outside. So world is and the society is diverse, and the company is having people belonging to only, let's say, one race or one social class, that would be a wrong idea of a organization. So what has happened in news is now that Donald Trump, when he signed many of the executive orders recently, he tried to give leaves, or he sent the people who were recruited on diversity, equity and inclusive principles in the government offices, they were sent on administrative leave. What is the reason? After the leave, after when they were being leave, the government plans to shut down many of the programs which hired people under DEI project. So the idea is that Donald Trump and his believer followers and the government believes that this concept is non-American in nature, and it tries to discriminate among the public, and it's a big threat to meritocracy. So, with this argument, Donald Trump has called out to remove DEI principle. So, very few days prior to this, Amazon company tells that we do not want to have DEI. And even if you see the very popular Meta also talks about withdrawing from the idea of DEI. That is, it will no more recruit people from different diversities, equities with the principle of inclusion, but will hire people only on merit. And that is something that made a lot of controversy now. So, when these companies are compromising the idea on diversity, what are the lessons that Indian companies should have? So, how Indian companies should respond in this case? So, in this article, the author has mainly given four main points to tell why DEI is a great concept for India. So, there is a proof that employers who have accepted DEI, that is, there is DEI in their firm, they value diversity and inclusive workplaces, hence this provision is there. So part of the answer whether how should India respond to this should be that this concept is not just for profit but serves a national purpose. That is, DEI serves a national purpose. So in India, a country of deep inequalities that has long grappled with a debate of merit versus reservation, we see that private sector DEI initiatives have been a welcome steps towards equality of opportunity, because government has affirmative action and it's very easy to get into these areas, but when comes to private, DEI will make the workplaces more inclusive. So, India should continue this concept of diversified workplaces, even though we see that it's not a direct policy of the Indian government. The country companies have already adopted it to a great extent. So, when the second point is that while this grants of kind of foot in the door policy, that is, once the people with different diversity enter into the workforce, those disadvantaged by the forces beyond their control, it also makes eminent business sense, correct? So it gives advantage, it gives a lot of control to disadvantaged sections of society, and it is a very good business sense, we can say. Okay, it is, as the title of this article goes, DEI is not just a social or a moral imperative. Many researches shows that the workplace that is more diverse, it has a positive correlation with business performance. That is, how it is possible? We have a concept called employee retention. That is, once a person joins a company, they should not be switching frequently. If they are quite diverse, the employee retention is high, around 2.5 times higher than the organization that makes workers feel that they can't be themselves when we are working. So this is telling how productivity improves if the organization is diverse, inclusive, and equitable. So at the same time, the third concept is that this process boosts creativity in the organization. So the teams with diverse range of, let's say, life experiences, they are more empathetic and more innovative. So diversity of viewpoints leads to better satisfaction of customers as well, because when you are making products, when you are giving services which is created by people who have varied backgrounds, varied empathies, and varied emotions, your products or services are going to be the best in the market, as they would be inclusive in nature. So the fourth one is about buyers or customers of your product. They seems to recognize or value DEI based companies as well. So there is a particular index called Cantor's Brand Inclusion Index. Okay, you can quote this into your answer. Brand Inclusion Index of 2024. It's a survey of more than 23,000 people in 18 countries, where they found that the purchase decision of three-fourths of the respondents were influenced by a brand's reputation for diversity and inclusion. So, the more diversity and more inclusion, the customers or buyers would be more happy. So, if you recall, in the month of I think December, 14th or 15th of December, we had created a episode of ICANN where we spoke about compassionate capitalism. At the same time, in the same discussion, we had spoke about how different capitalism can be modeled to create the best value for everybody in the society. So you can take this topic down under the same concept of compassionate capitalism and inclusive capitalism. So this would be directly impactful in GS paper 4, corporate governance, how companies which are have many stakeholders need to be inclusive, and this DEI. So we can expect a direct question from UPSC as in how the principle of DEI matter for India more. So whatever we discuss now is a direct answer for those questions. So the next topic is a concept called loud budgeting, which had come in Indian Express. So we are in the budget season now already, and loud budgeting is about a new trending word in the social media. So Gen Z's bold new approach to spending smart and saying no. So this concept is about indirectly related to an essay that UPSC had already asked on FOMO, that is fear of missing out. So fear of missing out is that perception where you have an anxiety or a fear of inability to be present somewhere or do something. It is deeply tied to a social status and a kind of prestige, that is, if they are doing, I am not able to do that, so I'm probably missing out something. It creates a lot of anxiety. So people in the younger generation are victims of FOMO and leading to many mental health issues. Is it a genuine case, or what was the ethics essay papers question? So now there is another kind of FOMO that is told by the public, is that there is a Gen Z employee who is working in an organization, and on 29th of a month some of his friends invite him or her for a party or a kind of shopping, that they can go for an exhibition or a movie or something like that. But as many of us know, month end is something where most of the liquidity is gone away, and people are in looking out for salary that gets credited. So if you go, you just have to dig into your savings, that is money that you have saved, and go spend the money on, let's say, movie or shopping or anything. But Gen Z is telling that if you don't go, what if you don't go? You feel the fear of missing out and tell that, what if I have not watched the movie that is popular? What if I'm not on par with my friends in partying? Or what if I'm not on par with friends when they're having fun with the money that they have earned? So Gen Z tells that, or the idea that is popularized among Gen Z is that there is nothing to be feared and anxious about if you are not having money at the end of the day. Plan your finances in such a way that you don't go to these places or spend extravagantly when you don't have the resources, because what you have saved is for your future, and you can't dig into your savings for, let's say, the present fun, or present, we can say, enjoyment or present gratification. Hence, this is what is the concept of romanticizing financial discipline. So this concept is like admitting defeat, not feeling guilty, and not having any social embarrassment. This term is very important. Social embarrassment, when you tell no, I can't come today because my salary is still due. So what exactly is loud budgeting in better terms? It was a kind of TikTok trend that went off in 2024, driven by young people openly prioritizing savings over mindless spending. So it marks a clear mental shift altogether, right? One where saving for the future isn't seen as embarrassing but empowering. You are saving for future just because you want to feel empowered. So loud budgeting is about being vocal and unapologetic about financial priorities. Right? It is about reshaping the conversation around money, experiences, and social expectations. Basically, this is where many of the people get trapped to, taking loan and even borrowing for meeting the social expectations. So what is the buzzword here? Spending with intention. That is, mindful spending is the key. Mindful spending, that is, it is the key to tackling rising inflation, we can tell. So instead of seeing budgeting as restrictive, it can be viewed as something that truly matters. So openly discussing about financial choices by telling what one's spending intention is, it is creating confidence in the people and also giving them financial responsibility. So this trend is redefining the whole concept of missing out or FOMO, and is telling that this is a intention that we are having to save money for later times. So next comes the concept of a financial mindset shift. So instead of people focusing on momentary happiness, momentary happiness, young people are basically rewriting their financial stories through self discipline and vision. So it is not about forging experiences but redesigning the value of one's money that they have been earning. So this whole concept of romanticizing financial management is a very important concept, because inflation is quite high in many parts of the world, and that has made the Gen Z think seriously about money and not merely spending money on social pressure. So this topic would be very relevant for GS paper 1 on or GS paper 4, especially on, as in, how attitudes can be shaped by social media. And once this becomes a trend, imagine how much savings general public or especially Gen Z would be doing. So at the same time, this concept of we can say loud budgeting can also be relevant in GS paper 1 of Indian society, where perceptions and how society frames or society tries to shape the perception of a person. In that, it could be useful. At the same time, if your optional happens to be sociology, this example of how society inspires people to go for extravagant spending, and how social media, another entity of our society, tries to mold a person not to do the spending. So this concept would be very much useful in many of your GS papers. And as you know, UPSC observes the trends. This could be used in your answers as it is, even if you don't get a direct question on loud budgeting. So the last topic is called free from negativity. So this is based on a newspaper article from Economic Times, where the author here spoke about how are the secret of, let's say, lasting joy or ultimate happiness. It lies in something as simple as the thoughts we choose to entertain. So if we are entertaining optimistic or positive thought processes, our whole life becomes happy. We can perceive that this is a journey towards happiness, and we have to be gleeful and joyful in the whole scenario. So if your thoughts are optimistic and positive, the whole joy of the life and the secret of happiness will be this. But if you choose to entertain negative thoughts, though our life has better positive things, our activities and our days are only going to be sad if we entertain negative thoughts. So this topic is directly linked to one of the previous year essays that UPSC has asked, called ships do not sink because of water around them, ships sink because of water that gets into them. That is, when you talk about negative ideas, or when you talk about something that is happening around us, it doesn't matter at all unless and until we have a kind of control over the situation, and we try to shape things based on what all is under our perception. So without thinking about this, when we see that only what is in the surrounding is bad, this would happen, that wrong would happen, and instead of focusing on regulating them with a positive thought process, the ship of our life is definitely not going to sail, but only is going to sink. So here we have a very good quote given by Bhagavad Gita, which talks about mind is both a friend and enemy of the self. What does it mean now? So a single negative thought can influence our neurology, leading to a cascade of psychological reactions. So what the psychological reactions could be, it kind of creates an imbalance in the body. Let's say you just took a mock test, as the prelim season is around the corner. You took a mock test and for multiple reasons you couldn't get a good score. So despite the optimistic person you are, there is a single negative thought that pops up in your mind, that I have been studying and how come I'm not getting a good score. And if you entertain this thought, a single negative thought that came in your mind, your whole day would be in this whole guilt that you're studying and you're not getting a good score in the mock. But if you curtail that thought and tell that, well, I have made these many mistakes, these are the areas where I lack revision, and in the next mock I am not going to give up, I am definitely going to work better. So if that thoughts are entertained, it will make your chances of clearing prelims more higher, whereas sitting and wasting a day on entertaining this negative thought. So we have another important reference tool, so do remember this, not only for exam purpose but for your lives as well. So the next particular concept that this article discussed was an idea that goes from Manduka Upanishad. So this Upanishad tells that pure consciousness is a natural state of bliss. Correct? Remember the phrase here, pure consciousness is a natural state of bliss. So if you're happy and cheerful, that is when you're completely conscious. So mind, it is said that generates approximately 60,000 thoughts every day. So imagine how busy our brains are. So we must be so conscious in selecting that which of these thoughts are going to make our day. So this conscious selecting, and by focusing on those thoughts that promote positivity, we can make all the differences in our life. So with consistent practice, the subconscious mind can be trained to naturally kind of filter and prioritize positive thoughts and transform how we perceive and respond to life. So even Patanjali's Yoga Sutras teach that by cultivating attitudes of friendliness towards happiness and compassion, we can make a lot of differences in our daily life. So if you see what scares the people most, any time in your life or any proper human mortal life, the fear of death. That is, it is something that scares everybody, and it is an idea that nobody wants to think or discuss about, and it is usually perceived as a negative emotion because it's associated with fear. So even in the face of death, the greatest fear of human life, that is, death is going to happen. When we fear about it, if you are positive, you can embrace even death. So some see death as a mother of beauty, so embracing it, and when they accept it with grace, you have nothing to fear in your life. And imagine a life free of fear. It is something that you can live your life up to full expectations. So the best example for this is Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. So he described death as the greatest invention of life. So this optimistic lifestyle is what makes people live their life to the best. So such perspective, it exemplifies that positivity is not just about ignoring challenges, it is also about transforming how we perceive those challenges and make them into a positive outlook. So try to quote this topic of beauty of life and what Manduka Upanishad tells, and how free mind matters a lot according to Bhagavad Gita, especially when you're writing essays or any kind of GS4 answers about optimism as a way of life for a bureaucrat. So thank you for watching, and stay with us for more informed choices in your mains answer writing. Thank you.